Welcome to Living for the People. This is Nathan Hare, welcoming you to our new broadcast focused on providing insight into events shaping our national and regional world and the facts behind those events and policies that are shaping our world for today and for tomorrow. Join us on Mondays from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. and on Wednesdays and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. following Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Program. Normally, we would be broadcasting from the studio at Buffalo State College at 91.3 FM WBNY, but we're still in remote status because the campus is not open yet for these kinds of activities. So we're broadcasting from the Rafi Green Maston Resource Center at 1423 Fillmore Avenue. Emmanuel Radford, however, is still doing the live streaming of the program. And so if you have your computer or your handheld device, you can type in Living for the People. That's LIVING, the number 4, the people. The program will come up and you can type in your questions, your concerns, or your observations, and we'll respond to as many as we can while we're on the air. If you have access, if you're listening over the air and you can access by phone, you can call us at 398-9817. That's 398-9817. And again, we'll respond to whatever your questions, concerns, or observations are while we're on the air. So I wanted to take today to visit an issue. I'm going to talk about a few issues today, but I wanted to take today first to explore what happens if Donald Trump doesn't feel that he lost by enough to accept the result of the election? Notice the way I said that, right? Because he lost by 3 million votes the last time, right? But he didn't accept the results of the election, and it worked out. They delivered an electoral college victory for him, even though he got 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton. Now, I'm not saying that he cheated, so don't take it that way. I'm simply saying that was the case. Donald Trump has said repeatedly during the 2016 election and in the last year that the elections are rigged. If we have mail-in ballots, the mail-in ballots are going to be, rigged against me. There's a conspiracy underway. China's going to be printing, what is that, Emmanuel? China's going to be printing counterfeit ballots. Now, please, I know sometimes you all think that I'm just on Donald Trump all the time. And you're right, I am on Donald Trump all the time. But some things are just ridiculous. You need to explore things. In order for you to produce counterfeit ballots, just in one county, the ballots that you used last election cycle, you can't use them for the next election cycle because the machine won't read them. Okay, so those ballots are out. Every county in the state has its own ballots. And there are extremely unique things to every ballot. The size of the ballot, the kind of paper the ballot is printed on, the ink you use, on the ballot. I mean, there are dozens of different features on every ballot for every county. You would have to be a person who would somehow be able to acquire a ballot from every single county in the country and then find a way to counterfeit every single one of those ballots and have the same paper, the same ink, et cetera, right?
Why China?
Well, because that's the boogeyman, right? Donald Trump has to blame somebody. So if he blamed, somebody like, Tariq or Turkestani or someplace, you wouldn't even know what country he was talking about, right? Because Americans only know where Canada is, and half of them don't even know where Canada is and whatnot. So you got to give him a name, that he can rally people around. So China's the new boogeyman. So this is an article that I know you guys have heard of this guy, Max Boot. He's a columnist for the Washington Post. And I just want to give you his spin and lay a little bit of what you've already heard me, some of my spin on it. But he says that Donald Trump is already laying the foundation to dispute the election outcome with his incessant claims that mail-in ballots will lead to, and he says in big letters, massive electoral fraud in a rigged 2020 election. Remember, this is the same Donald Trump that said that the reason why he didn't win by he didn't get more actual votes than Hillary Clinton is because some illegal aliens migrated in from Vermont, crossed the border into New Hampshire, cast a whole bunch of votes in New Hampshire, and then migrated back across the Vermont border, and then disappeared from being able to be counted.
They cease to exist.
They cease to exist, right? And he said this for weeks. And his press secretaries repeated this nonsense, right? So anyway, elected officials label such concerns as preposterous and false, but they will serve as an excuse for the Republican Party to purge voter registration rolls. This is what you got to understand. What Donald Trump is doing is he's pre-rigging the election before the election actually occurs, getting Republicans to claim that if I send out a postcard to a address, the last address that somebody has, and the postcard comes back, that means that person doesn't live there anymore. Therefore, they're no longer a registered voter, and you throw their registration out. When in other states, if they sent you a postcard and the postcard came back, they wouldn't send you a notice of where the election is going to take place, that voter card. They wouldn't send that to you because they know it's not going to get there. But if you showed up at the polls and you're on the registration list and your signature is in the book, you bring your ID, you could vote, right? Because their systems are designed to enable people to vote, to not have artificial barriers to stop people from being able to vote. But that's not what the Republicans are doing. Anything they can do to knock you off the ballot and make you have to go through the process of putting yourself back on the registration rolls, that's what they're going to do. So they're trying to limit mail-in ballots. And why they would talk about limiting mail-in ballots when Mike Pence, Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, all of the highlight people, they vote by mail all the time. In fact, Ivanka Trump is probably guilty of election fraud because she votes from a place that she doesn't live, and she didn't register that she doesn't live in another place. Right? So she's literally breaking the law when she votes. Nobody has anything to say about that. But Lord, don't you show up. You used to live on Dodge Street, and now you live on Life Avenue, in Buffalo, and all of you're a horrible person if you showed up to vote, at the place you normally voted on Dodge Street over at the St. Martin's Village complex. That would make you a criminal. Anyway, they try to close polling places. I want to talk about that in a second in minority areas. And they challenge in-person voting. They're actually recruiting. The Republican Party is recruiting and paying millions of dollars to recruit people to go to polling places this November and challenge people who come to vote. Excuse me, you have an ID? I don't like that ID. That doesn't look like a good enough ID for me. You can't vote. Well, who are you to tell me that I can't vote? Doesn't matter who I am. You can't vote. Right? So I'm a Republican. I'm not even going to go through all the racial stuff, but I'm a Republican and I say you can't vote. And then you have to go through a process to challenge that person, a legal process for you to be able to get your vote at least registered. And then they'll put your vote into a provisional basket. That vote does, all the rest of the votes get counted. You a listener?
No.
Oh, okay. So I just want you to understand that's what's going on. It's doubtful that anything Trump does will produce a popular vote victory this year. I mean, he's 10 points behind almost across the board in every poll. Some polls have him like 17 or 18 points behind. But, I don't get too excited about that because there's 4 months to go before we get to November 3rd. And anything can happen, as you see right now. And I blame the media in this country, too. I'm sick of them talking about how the media is so unfair to Donald Trump. The media keeps talking as if these jobs that show up have been showing up for the last 2 months, that Trump deserves some kind of credit for this. They talk about, the economy is roaring back. Donald Trump is leading us back. Donald Trump is taking all kind of credit for it. Yes, this shows you if I'm in charge, we'll get the economy ramp back up again. It wasn't my fault that the coronavirus showed up, but I'm the one who's leading us back, and we're going to have the greatest economy like we had in January and February of this year. I need for you to understand this in context. In a span of 10 days, from March 13th of this year to March 23rd of this year, Donald Trump ordered the governors across the state or across the nation to shut down virtually 40% of the economy. We had 48 million jobs that were being worked in February that were no longer being worked April 1 of this year. 48 million jobs. Now, in my view, since there were people who actually had those jobs, but they were being told not to come to work, and they were putting up payroll protection money to give these people the ability to keep getting paid, even though they weren't coming to work, that should not have counted as lost jobs, because there's people who have their names on those jobs. Now, there are some jobs that won't come back. And when that happens, and when that gets certified, then those jobs should be counted as lost jobs. But that's not the way they did it. They treated it as if 48 million jobs disappeared. And then when Donald Trump, I think it was an hour and a half later after he did the shutdown, and he started hearing the whining, from people around the country. He said, "Oh no, it's freedom. We got to reopen the economy. It's a freedom." The governor Whitmer in Michigan, she's a Nazi. She's trying to be a dictator over us and whatnot, even though he's the one who shut the economy down in the first place. So he shut the economy down over a 10-day period. When they decided to start opening the economy back up in the 3rd or 4th week of April of this year, all people had to do was to go back to the jobs they already had. It's not like they had to go out and do resumes, and start, knocking on doors, around their cities and their counties, trying to find a job. They just went back to the job they had previously been working. So you don't get credit for restoring something that you are the one destroyed. If you close a store and then you reopen the store, you don't get credit as if you created an addition to the economy. You closed the store in the first place, right? All you did was bring us back to where we were before you closed the store. So the 7.5 million jobs between May and June of this year that have come back are jobs that people already had in January and February of this year. Donald Trump should not get credit for that. In fact, the way you should look at it is, if you were able to knock 48 million people off of the rolls of people that are working in the 2nd and 3rd week of March of this year, that took you 10 days to get that dubious achievement. Why is it taking you 2 months after you started to reopen the economy, and you still only have 7 or 8 million of those jobs have come back over the course of this time period? That's what the media should be saying, but they're not saying it. So don't tell me that the media is against Donald Trump when they're buying his spin. He reframes the reality of something. He takes the reality is the jobs were dropped in a 10-day period in March, and in in May and June, you didn't get those jobs back. You've only got 7 or 8 million of the 48 million jobs back. Somebody has a comment?
They said even though you won't give him credit, Donald Trump has created almost 4 million jobs since he's been elected. You got to give him credit for that.
How can you say he created 4 million? So what they're looking at, if they're looking at the jobs that were created between February of 2017 and March of 2000 or February of 2020. If you're looking at that, yes, 4 million jobs were created over that time period. I don't know that I would give Donald Trump credit for those jobs, because job creation was already underway. Under the Obama administration, an average of 223 jobs in the private sector were created every single month. So just think about that. Over a 10-month period, that would be 2.3 million jobs. Obama, from 2010 through 2016, a 7-year period, so a span of 84 months. Do the math. 84 months times 223 average jobs created per month, we're talking about 16 or 17 or 18 million jobs under the Obama administration. Trump has created in half the time only 4 million jobs. And he's lost 48 million of those 4 million jobs, and only 7 million of those jobs have come back. So I hear what you're saying. You want to give him credit for that. You know, I was going to take credit yesterday for the sun coming up. No, seriously, I was thinking about it, you know, and I was talking to my vice president for finance and administration. I said, you know, the sun came up, you know, again yesterday, and I was here. I was right at my desk, right? The sun came up and I was here. I think I should get credit, you know, for that. And that's the kind of credit that I give Donald Trump, you know, for the jobs. But I appreciate, you know, the continued advocacy for trying to make Donald Trump seem like he's done something that he hasn't done. The point I'm making is Donald Trump is a threat to the democracy of the United States. That's the real point that I'm trying to make that you understand. And the only way you're going to be able to defend this country from the caprices of Donald Trump is you're going to have to pay attention. You have to make sure that you vote, even if you're going to vote for Donald Trump. You have to make sure that you vote. You have to make sure that your sister, even though she may vote for Donald Trump because you're voting for Donald Trump, you have to make sure that your sister votes. You got to make sure that your parents vote, your grandparents vote, your cousins, your friends across the street. The only way you can make this thing work is if everybody votes. There are so many barriers that are being created by the Republicans right now. The only way you're going to be able to resist it is if you do everything in your power to both register now and get to the polls yourself. You have a listener?
Why is Donald Trump the only president who doesn't get credit for things happening under his administration? Every previous president got credit for everything that happened under their administration.
That is patently not true. That's patently not true. In fact, when Barack Obama became president, the country was in the midst of the worst recession the country had faced since 1929. And the media said the day after Barack Obama got elected, the media said that Barack Obama gets 1 year. And if the economy is not smoking again in 1 year, that's going to be on Barack Obama. That'll be his fault. Now, we're talking about the worst recession in 70 or 80 years had taken place, right? And George Bush doesn't get blamed for that. Barack Obama gets blamed for that, even though he had nothing to do with it. Then as he was bringing the economy back, and he's getting first 100,000 jobs and 200,000 jobs and 300,000 jobs per month, as he was generating that kind of success in rebuilding the economy, every single month they would say, well, he didn't do good enough. You know, the population growth in the United States, you would need another 150,000 jobs per month just to take care of the population growth. So what he's doing is just not enough. So all the way through for Barack Obama, there was naysaying on everything that he did and everything that Donald Trump didn't even do. He gets credit for what good things are taking place and gets no respect. And he actually said, you all heard him not a month ago say he takes no responsibility for any of the things that have taken place that were not good things. So you have to be the ones to govern yourselves in terms of understanding that. The Transition Integrity Project is a nonpartisan group founded by Rosa Brooks of the Georgetown Law School and Niels Gilman of the Berggruen Institute. They tried to do something called a war game, where they came up with a scenario that may occur, and then they started to analyze what would likely occur if this scenario happened. So they talked about a situation in which the election was very close between Biden and Trump. Biden would win the popular vote and also win the Electoral College, but only by a small amount, and 78 Electoral College votes for Biden and 260 Electoral College votes for Trump. So to secure the 10 Electoral College votes to swing the election, what they did is they focused on three of the swing states that Biden won in their scenario, which would have been Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which of course were the states that gave the election to Trump in 2016. And then they said that normally the governor of a state certifies the election results. And in all three states, the governor of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania is a Democratic governor. However, in all three of those states, their state assembly and their state senate are Republican, right? And so what they say is that there's nothing to prevent the legislature from certifying a different election outcome than what the actual statistical outcome was in the election. If the two legislatures came together and said, well, I kind of like Donald Trump, and even though he really only got 9 votes, we're going to give him credit for 12, and he won the Electoral College votes, period. Go home. Well, that's what happened during the impeachment hearings.
How do you feel about this Electoral College model? Do you think it's time for the country to just relook at this and update? Because the fact is, the popular vote matters, but it doesn't. It holds no weight, and so it's hard to convince people to vote when their vote holds no weight.
In a Republican democracy, the structure of it is designed so that you can prevent coups from taking place. You can prevent craziness, like you can get a wildfire of mob rule, going along, in your country, and you can end up with a complete bonehead. Oops, that happened already. We have a bonehead, right? But you could end up with a complete bonehead, a David Duke or some crazy person like that could wind up being the president. So in reality, when you vote for a particular candidate, you're actually voting for the Electoral College representatives for your state. And so the representatives who get voted in the Electoral College, even though they're representing a particular candidate, they could vote for somebody different if they chose to. So they are not obligated by law to vote for the candidate whose banner they ran under to become the electoral.
So let's make it plain for the viewers. So you're telling me my city can vote overwhelmingly for Joe Biden.
Yes.
And the Electoral College can say, yeah, I see it, but
Right.
I like Donald Trump.
Right.
And vote
Right.
for Donald Trump.
Right. Now, of course, that would not happen in a if there was a robust vote, for your candidate. So if there was a robust vote for Biden, you wouldn't have the Electoral College vote against, Joe Biden. But remember the situation, you guys were just born then, in 2001, when Al Gore ran against George W. Bush. And in Florida, you had an election that looked like it was like 500 votes, was the difference between one and the other in that election. And the Supreme Court literally chose George W. Bush to be the vote getter, even though there was a lot of ambivalence and a lot of counter. How shall I say it? There were different scenarios of what the vote actually had been. So these things have happened in the past. That's what the scenario that the Georgetown sort of war game scenario, that's what they were talking about. That the governor of a state could say that the vote should go one way, but the assembly and the Senate, being controlled by Republicans, they could just choose to say, nope, I'm certifying that Donald Trump won the election, and that's legal in the United States. I just want to come back to the Electoral College piece for just a second. In my view, in response to the listener's question, in my view, we should wipe out the Electoral College, given that we now have such how shall I say it? We have such good technology so that we can know, or at least I'm hoping that we do, that we can know who voted, who they voted for, where they voted from. We have a lot of capacity to assure ourselves that what we think people voted is what they actually voted, and so on, that you don't need to have the Electoral College to be the sort of intercessor or something that's in between the people and the person being elected. You don't need the Electoral College in between anymore. That may have been the case, when the country was first formed. And remember, you didn't have, the postal service, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have TV, you didn't have telephones, and that sort of stuff. So, it took a long time for votes to get counted.
Right.
And so on. There was a lot of opportunities for misconduct, to go on in that scenario. So the Electoral College was created to ensure that you wouldn't be able, it wouldn't be easy, for somebody to be able to distort the electoral process, the voting process, and put somebody in who was not actually elected by the people. That was what the idea was.
Do we really have faith that we have honest and free and fair elections in this country?
Well, when I was growing up, we used to have faith, but that's when we believed in Ozzie and Harriet. But Ozzie and Harriet's show was taken off the air because
what's Ozzie and Harriet?
It was unrealistic. The Ozzie and Harriet was a TV program that used to come on, with Leave It to Beaver and all that sort of stuff. Right? It was in that era, so it had this sort of fanciful view, this fairy tale kind of view of what America was about. So the ability to ensure that there is absolute integrity in our voting process is there. Whether or not we honor ourselves or that we use the ability that we have is what is in question. So, for example, this goes back again to the George W. Bush election. They created these things called the Diebold voting machines. The Diebold voting machines are, you don't have a paper ballot. You fill out something and then a machine reads your ballot, and then your ballot is basically discarded, and you only have the record that's in the machine. The machine had the ability to flip your vote. So you could vote for person A, and the machine could have that vote registered for person B. Not because the machine would do it on its own, but you could hack the machine. If you were close enough to the machine, you could hack the machine and you could flip votes and so on. So there's still that possibility because there's a lot of those Diebold machines still in use around the United States.
So what are the key states that you believe Joe Biden has to win to secure his election?
I think the same states that Hillary Clinton lost, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, got to win them. I don't think he has to win Arizona, but it would probably be real important if he did win Arizona. I don't think he has a good shot at winning Texas, but it's possible. Texas is kind of... I know. And Mayor Pete may be the reason why the Democrats don't win Texas. No disrespect, it's just... It's like Archie Comedy Hour, and it's just hard to vote for comedic, persons and whatnot. But then that's just me. I have issues. So I think those are the critical states. I think Colorado has to turn. You got to win some of these Midwestern states. Now, obviously, California's probably going to go that way. Oregon's going to go that way. Washington's more than likely going to go with the Democratic nominee. Now, Georgia may be a state where the state legislature just steals the election and gives it to George Bush. To Donald Trump. Georgia is in many ways like a rogue state. I'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of what Georgia has done in terms of polling places. They have basically reduced 90% of the polling places in the state of Georgia, forcing people to have to go to, some arena, in some large city. So you live at the end of a county, you got to drive 60 miles, to get to a polling place, because they claim that since you're going to have all of these mail-in ballots, you don't need as many polling places. The reality is whether you only have a 1% mail-in ballots or you have 99% mail-in ballots, the 1% or 99% of people who are voting need a polling place that's close to where they live. That's the whole idea of democracy. You got to make it possible for people to be able to vote, not for people to have to stand in line for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time, which is going on in Kentucky. We saw that going on in New Orleans. We saw that going on in Georgia and so on. So I think that, we got a lot to concern ourselves with during the course of this run. So a similar thing happened in terms of stealing the election in 1876. In the election where Democrat Samuel J. Tilden was leading on Election Day in both the popular vote and in the Electoral College, but the results were contested in 3 states. Congress appointed a commission to adjudicate the dispute. This is before they had the state assembly and state senate structure for doing this thing. Congress appointed a commission to adjudicate the dispute, and it voted along party lines, just like they did during the impeachment hearings, despite the evidence that made it absolutely clear that misconduct, criminal misconduct, had taken place by this president. In spite of that, they just voted by party against impeaching the president of the United States. Well, in this case, they voted to give the election to Rutherford B. Hayes 8-7 along party lines, even though it was clear that Samuel Tilden had actually won not only more votes, but he actually won more votes in the Electoral College. So this has happened in the past. It gave Rutherford B. Hayes a 185 to 184 majority in the Electoral College and gave him the presidency. The Republican Party bombarded the airways with claims of electoral fraud. And this is the gaming thing that Georgetown came up with, that this is what the Republican Party would do now. They would bombard the airways with claims of electoral fraud and insist that Trump had been cheated of victory. The GOP would file suit to prevent the certification of the results. Attorney General William Barr, who in real life is already making specious claims about mail-in voter fraud, and supported this effort in our mock exercise by claiming to have detected efforts by, this is what William Barr has been saying. He said he claims there's been efforts by Chinese intelligence, Antifa terrorists, and other enemies of the people to steal the election. Just outright lying. When people said, well, Attorney General Barr, where's your evidence? What are you basing that on? Well, I just know this is going on, and it's just going on. No, we don't want to. It's going on. That's not evidence. We need evidence. This is what's going on. We know this is happening. The Chinese do this sort of stuff, right? And so the goal was that the scenario states is that if we had a close election, that Trump would tie up the proceedings in the courts, initially at the state level, and quickly force the Republican-dominated Supreme Court to intervene. And while this would be going on, the gaming scenario suggested that there would be chaos in the streets with pro and anti-Trump activists mobilizing, massive protests and violence erupting. Democrats believed that mass protests could force the government to respect the election outcome, but as Team Trump, they calculated that Team Trump would hope that the chaos would help persuade the Supreme Court to intervene to shut down the dispute. In other words, the same thing that was done in the Bush-Gore election, that would get done this time. In their scenario, they said in the year 2000, when the Gore-Bush race took place, even 2 of the more moderate conservative justices, Sandra Day O'Connor and Anthony Kennedy, voted to end Florida's recount and handed the election to George W. Bush. So you have to ask, could we count on Chief Justice John G. Roberts, the current so-called swing vote, to resist similar pressure to vote for the home team? So I think that Judge Roberts is trying to create an image of himself as some sort of fair person. All right, you all have heard that. What was the issue before the Supreme Court that he just ruled on? Judge John Roberts. just ruled on something at the Supreme Court level, and basically it was the issue about having access to the president's tax records. And Roberts said that the Congress had a right to have access to the records, but not right now. Well, what good is it going to do us to get access to his records in February of next year? We need the access to the records now so we can determine whether or not this man is a provable crook right now. But John Roberts got to make it appear that he was being fair and balanced because the independent counsel that's looking into this case with regard to Donald Trump, he gave him the ability, because this is actual criminal investigation. The Roberts court gave, I think his name is Vance. Gosh, I don't know, my mind is messing with me, but his last name is Vance, the inspector, the inspector general on this case, and he gave him access to Donald Trump's tax records. I think it's through the accounting firm that prepared Donald Trump's taxes in the first place, to be able to get the records from that accounting firm, but the records would be under seal because this is a grand jury investigation. Any evidence that's provided to the grand jury is kept in secret until after the grand jury renders a decision about whether or not they're going to indict. And then even if they render a decision to indict, the rules in that jurisdiction will determine whether or not that information becomes public at that point. So we're not going to see that information coming out until well after the election. That's my point. So, but Roberts could have ruled that Congress had a right to see the records right now because Congress has oversight responsibility over the executive branch of government. Why shouldn't the Congress get the information right now? We've had these issues in the past. They always say that a negotiation takes place between the president and the investigative bureau of the Congress, whether it's the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Intelligence Committee or the Judiciary Committee and so on. They work it out in negotiation, but you can't work out a negotiation with a president who says, I'm not going to give you anything.
Yeah, I'm reading some of the article about the actual ruling, and it says that the president claimed that answering a subpoena for his tax records
Right.
would distract him
Right.
from his official duties.
Yeah, from watching TV.
And the Congress category denied it.
Right.
Because it's ridiculous.
It would have distracted him from watching Fox News and Twittering, okay? Because the man does no work. He plays golf and he watches TV, and then he comments on stuff, with 40-word, whatever it is, 40 character, 240 character, remarks, that he makes on Twitter. That's exactly right. I mean, the mere fact that a president would say to you that if he were called upon to tell his administration to provide some paper records to an investigative body, that he couldn't do that because it would distract him from doing his job. If he is that incompetent that he could not do his job while somebody else was doing their job, he should not be the president of the United States. He should resign. Nobody should be that lazy. Nobody should be that dumb.
And it also begs the question.
Because I'm also reading, like you said, we're not going to see these tax returns till
Right.
after the election.
Right.
What are you hiding? Because if you were squeaky clean, it would be no issue.
That is entirely the issue. That's why this came up in the first place. Every president since the crook Richard Nixon left office, every president since that time or every presidential candidate since that time has voluntarily given up 2, 5, 10, some 20. I think Mrs. Clinton gave up 20 years of her tax returns. And her tax returns weren't just her tax returns. Her tax returns are her husband's tax returns. They filed jointly, right? And all of their business was on the table and so on. And they got lacerated for stuff. Oh my gosh, you took $250,000 to speak at this place over here, and then you did a favor for that company. This was graft. This was, bribery. It was emolument, and so on, right? They took all kind of heat for things that came up in the inspection of their tax returns. But they live through it because that's your job. You have to be that transparent for the people of this country. Here's a man who is so completely non-transparent, proving to you that he has so much misconduct that he has to hide, that he will try to bully you into not insisting that he turn over records that should be turned over to the public. And then you out there in the public, you say, well, that's right. Donnie shouldn't have to turn over his tax returns. You know, they were just trying to embarrass him. Well, everybody turns over their tax returns, and everybody gets embarrassed by something that they see in their tax returns.
The end of this article says the fact that it took nearly a full term in office for the courts to articulate such a fundamental constitutional truth, and that still Congress and American people will be left wondering, is damning evidence that justice delayed is justice denied.
And anybody who doesn't want him to turn over those tax returns, you are just enabling this man to do what he has done his entire life, to engage in misconduct. And every time he gets caught, he attacks the people who accuse him of engaging in misconduct. And then he tries to tie them up in court and spend up so much of their resources that they get tired and they just go away. So participants in the war game that I was just talking about concluded that the result would be near civil war in the streets. Now, this may seem like a far-fetched thing, but far-fetched rumors are enough to bring out armed right-wing militias today. So you can say it's far-fetched what I'm saying, that you wouldn't see this chaos in the street. But look around. Just because you had Black Lives Matter people saying that we shouldn't have monuments to the Confederate traitors, you know, around the United States, you know, being memorialized as if they were heroic figures and so on, you know, of the United States, that has brought out people coming in the front of the governor's, you know, mansion in Michigan. A woman, he doesn't even call her by name. She's not Governor Whitmer. She's the woman. I just, you don't find that offensive that he would talk about, you know, this governor that way. You see I forget the city in Ohio. Remember the small city we were talking about in Ohio? Yep, right. But in this little tiny city, you know, a little hamlet type city and whatnot, right? They were doing a peaceful rally around Black Lives Matter. And you got these militias come in. Somehow they managed to get on top of the roofs of private businesses with their AR-15s, you know, Bethel, right, Ohio, with their AR-15s. They're marching, you know, around the protesters, you know, with their guns, you know, and so on. So they're already doing this stuff, right? So you can believe that this is the risk that we are facing in this country if Donald Trump does not win. Let me just quickly talk about this Confederate monuments thing. Billy Binion wrote an article about Confederate monuments are participation trophies. So I know you all have become familiar with this, right? That you know, you have these little sporting contests and so on, and nobody loses. You know, so somebody comes in first, but everybody else gets a trophy for participating. You know, man, you did a great job, man. You know, you were there, you didn't die, you didn't fall over, you're still in your seat. That's great. You get a trophy, you know, and so on. Well, that's what he refers to these Confederate monuments as. Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, most often memorialized by these monuments. This is something important for you to hear. Just listen to this. Robert E. Lee in 1869. 4 years after the end of the Civil War, he said, I quote, "It would be wiser not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the examples of those nations who endeavor to obliterate the marks of civil strife, to commit to oblivion the feelings engendered." In other words, Lee himself contended that people should not put up monuments memorializing and glorifying the secessionist South, which caused the overwhelming loss of life and property in the first place. Lee wrote these remarks as he rejected an invitation to enshrine Confederate memorials of fallen soldiers. Now, Lee himself died in 1870. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, most of these monuments started to be erected between 1900 and 1930. So these were not monuments that were even celebrating so-called Southern history and the so-called legacy of the South. If that were the case, they would have been putting up those monuments right after the Civil War, in the 10 or 15 years after the Civil War. These monuments started to be created between 1900 and 1930. And so this was a time as African people fought and died in the First World War and began to strive for full citizenship, as they had fought for the freedom and liberty of Europeans. The values these monuments stood for were specifically for the glorification of the cause of the Civil War, American whites resisting recognition of Black Americans' full citizenship and Black Americans' rights to jobs in the American industries energized by the war. These whites resurrected the KKK and opened apartheid in the North as well as the South. They rallied behind the Confederate flags and the symbols of the Southern Confederacy, which meant white America first and only white America first, and only what was left over for blacks. That is what the resurgence of the ideation of the Southern Confederacy meant. Whites wanted the jobs in the American industries and didn't want to have to compete with Black Americans for those jobs. German and English descended whites tended to discriminate against other ethnic whites as well. In the end, however, all white ethnics came together to enforce discrimination and apartheid against Black Americans. In the decades following Robert E. Lee's death in 1870, many such monuments would come to be, and many would bear his likeness. There is a rich irony to the fact that Robert E. Lee, who recognized the ill-conceived nature of the idea, would become the unwitting mascot for those who support these memorials, these white supremacists and their sympathizers who marched on Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017 as they protested the removal of his statue. Whites in Nashville, Tennessee actually protested the removal of the statue of Edward Carmack, and I know you don't know his name. He was a newspaper publisher, and in the early 1900s, he was a state lawmaker who called for the firebombing of the civil rights activist and journalist Ida B. Wells. They had a monument for a person who actually called for firebombing the civil rights icon Ida B. Wells. And they protested taking down a statue to this malicious creature. His monument stood in front of the Tennessee State Capitol, an odd place for someone whose racist ideology did not stand the test of time. In Charlottesville, the Ku Klux Klan commemorated the May 21st, 1924 unveiling of Robert E. Lee's statue with a public cross burning on May 16th. I'm just trying to help you to understand. When these people say to you, and when you say to me, that the reason why you stand for these monuments to the Confederacy is because it celebrates Southern history, it celebrates Southern legacy. This is the legacy that you're talking about celebrating. In Charlottesville, the Ku Klux Klan commemorated on May 21st of 1924 the unveiling of Lee's statue with a public cross burning on May 16th and a 2-hour parade on May 18th of 1924 attended by thousands. This is not, only 0.1% of the people behave like this. Thousands. According to the archives of the newspaper in that area, the Daily Progress, the Charlottesville newspaper that had been publishing since 1892. The throngs of people equaled those usually seen here to witness the parade of the large circuses. This was like a circus celebration. According to the newspaper, the march of the white-robed figures, the Ku Klux Klan robed figures, was impressive, this is their words, was impressive and directed attention to the presence of the organization in the community. So the Daily Progress wasn't writing as they were opposed, to this. They were just lavishing it up. Oh man, it's a great thing we got going on. That wasn't an exception, but rather the rule. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the industrialist Julian Carr introduced the now toppled Silent Sam statue in 1913 with a speech on the merits of preserving white supremacy. Quoting Julian Carr, he said, 100 yards from where we stand, less than 90 days perhaps after my return from Appomattox, I horse whipped a Negro wench until her skirts hung in shreds. They had a statue to this person. And they're saying that you are in the wrong for trying to bring down a statue that commemorates the memory of this creature. This is what you're saying that you're defending. Now, if that's what you're defending, then admit it. Stop lying about it. Stop saying that this is, mint juleps, and white column, buildings and rolling plantations. That's what you're really, lauding. That's what you're trying to remember. That's not what it's about, and you know that that's not what it's about. Stop lying about this. In New Orleans in 1911, a celebration of the monument of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, a fierce defender of slavery, had a Stars and Bars formation singing Dixie at a white-only ceremony, and so on. This is a sentiment popular among American whites that those who fought for the Confederacy should not be forgotten. That's what this was about. Those who fought for the Confederacy should not be forgotten. Should those that fought for Hitler not be forgotten? Should those that fought for Mendel not be forgotten? Why would you say you would not want to forget these people? Why would you want to remember these people? They were traitors. They were evil monsters. I fundamentally disagree with this sentiment that those who fought for the Confederacy should not be forgotten. Every one of those monstrous caricatures of human beings should be forgotten. They should be left in the dustbins of history, occasionally being rediscovered by some avid historian wondering about who such people were who could do such monstrously evil things. History should remember the extraordinarily vicious and evil people who kidnapped, raped, robbed, murdered, and enslaved 10 to 20 million African people and built an entire national economy on the backs of these extraordinary people who survived such abomination. So you have to have some loyalty to truth. You have to have some loyalty to integrity. This is not about, do you like or dislike Donald Trump? This is about whether or not you are loyal to truth, whether or not you are loyal to the integrity that you claim this democracy is based on. Let's act like we are what we say we are, and let's stop aligning ourselves with deceit, lies, and misconduct. I'll see you all on Monday here at Living for the People at 91.3 FM WBNY.